Hello and welcome to the Quince webinar for its readers and viewers. I am Kritika and I lead the Quince Fact Checking Initiative webhost. This discussion today is about fact checking in India and how fact checkers have been combating misinformation and disinformation for the last 16 to 17 months in India now. Of course, COVID-19 pandemic is a major part of it. But before I introduce you to my panel, I would want to talk about certain key events which have happened in the last 1 year or so and how we've seen a massive spike in misinformation and disinformation around these news events. The simple reason why I want to do that is because fake news is parallel to real news, and I just want to bring the focus back to that. So today I'm being joined by Karen Ribello. She is the deputy editor for one of India's first fact-checking websites, Boom Live. Hi, Karen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kritika. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're also being joined by Vaishali Sood. She is the editor for QuintFit, which is the Quint's dedicated portal for health, fitness, and medical news. Thank you so much, Vaishali, for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Kritika.
Uh, we also have Surbhi Malik. She's a former journalist and media and verification trainer. She's currently the program director at Internews. Thank you so much, Surbhi, for being with us today.
Thanks, Kritika. Wonderful to join all of you to join this discussion.
And we're being joined by Shalini Joshi. She's a program director at Midan, a non-profit social technology company which helps bridge the technology gap for fact checkers. She's also a former journalist and a co-founder of Khabar Lehariya. Shalini has led a research program in India called Checkpoint, which focuses on misinformation in Indian elections. Welcome, Shalini, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kritika. Pleasure to be here and very nice to see an all-women panel on misinformation.
So my first question, I would want to begin by asking Vaishali. I want to understand from you the kind of misinformation that you have seen around COVID-19 and why do you think is health misinformation so dangerous?
So, Kritika, I think COVID has become the main news, right? I mean, usually health was always, a little section in a big newspaper. And suddenly COVID turned things around and the pandemic turned things around and everything is centered around the virus. So the misinformation is also coming at a speed that's usually not seen for in the health space. There's misinformation that's around the pandemic in the health space is actually the way it's presented is extremely believable. We're learning so much about the virus right now. There's still things that the world doesn't know about the virus. The world doesn't have a vaccine yet, despite over 160 vaccine candidates in the process of getting there. We still don't have a concrete treatment. The off-label use of certain drugs that has been allowed. And in this scenario, when someone comes and very confidently tells you that you do this and you'll not fall sick, or if you drink a certain kind of a juice, it'll provide you immunity, or if you say that this is a homeopathic medicine and it's also being promoted by the Ayush Ministry, so you tend to believe it, you want to believe it, and you think of it as, and when you repeatedly tell people it's like common flu, so then they say, okay, so I have Kara for common flu and, it suits my insides. And so, yes, it will also, I don't see why it would not work for coronavirus. So, the misinformation is various types. There's some misinformation which is about medicines. And then there's misinformation like, immunity boosting foods, immunity boosting ingredients, etc., and all of that tends to harm how we deal with the virus in our daily lives, and that has been a really big challenge for everybody. The WHO called it infodemic along with the pandemic that came, and it's been a massive challenge for everybody. And when some of this information comes from the top leaders of countries and politicians and presidents, and you tend to believe it. There's no reason why you would not believe them. And so the power of misinformation has hampered the progression that can be made with the pandemic. And that's where we are right now.
So, Karen, I want to come to you next, and I want to understand this from you since you're a fact checker. Initially, when a lot of misinformation started circulating on various social media platforms and WhatsApp, the problem was also the fact that we didn't have enough information even to counter that misinformation. So, in a situation like that, what do you think are the major challenges that fact checkers face, particularly like pertaining to COVID-19? Because in that case, you don't even have proper information to combat what people are saying. So, to taking from what Vaishali also said, messages like garlic water can cure coronavirus, and things like turmeric or drinking hot water is going to give you immunity. Then, how do you like? What are those challenges? How do you tackle that sort of misinformation?
Sure. So, I mean, to add on to what you and Vaishali said, the variety of misinformation that we've seen throughout the pandemic has just been mind-boggling. And I think it's been a perfect storm for fake news as such, because what, from our experience of fact checking, we've realized is that negative emotions are a trigger to misinformation. So here you have people worried about the fact that they could die or their loved ones could die. So that's playing on their mind. And then there's so much of uncertainty with regards to everything. And the other factor that is very huge when it comes to misinformation is a steady, constant flow of reliable information. Now, if you don't have that, if you have a vacuum, which is what we've seen during the pandemic, then that creates a situation where everybody can jump in and say, you know what, actually we think it's this and this could cure it, or this vaccine has resulted in issuing this results, or somebody in Russia found a cure, or somebody, here's an audio clip of somebody sitting in Wuhan. All those sort of narratives come into play when you have a vacuum of reliable, verified information coming out, which is what we have not seen in the pandemic, because it's still unfolding. People are still understanding as to how the virus is affecting people, because you have 30-year-olds dying, completely healthy individuals dying, and then you have people above the age of 50 and middle-aged people with comorbidities as well dying. Coming to your question of when you don't have all the information, and how do you debunk those things? It's very simple. As journalists, our jobs are not to be an expert in medicine, and I think we have to realize this. Even fact checkers, and we have to reach out to the experts and go by the best available experts and research that we have out there, and we have done that, right? Some of it is harder to debunk because it's based in truth. Like, if you eat ginger, and if you have a bad cold, and if you eat ginger or something like that, all of those things could like soothe your symptoms. But of course, when you're talking, on the scale of COVID, which is a deadly virus which can kill you, that sort of home remedy, you can't blanket prescribe it to everyone. I can't tell everybody, just drink some garlic water and you'll be fine, because that's crazy, because that would, bring down their own, their own guard. So maybe they think, okay, it's okay to not wear a mask because I'm drinking garlic water, and I'm doing all these things that, I'm drinking kada and all that I read. So, so just circling back, you have to rely, and it's been wonderful. We have reached out to doctors, we've reached out to scientists, medical journals. Everybody has been forthcoming about the knowledge, and tell your reader, okay, this is something we don't know yet. There is no research yet. Maybe it could be true, but it has to be clinically proven in some sort of trial for it to be a science, right? What is the definition of science? That you can repeat it, you can repeat the process and get the same result. So that's as far as how we are dealing with it.
So actually, I also want to bring in the fact, and I think I'm going to ask this question to Surbhi. Since Surbhi, you're an online verification and media expert, would you also be able to tell us the fact that, when we see all of these fake claims and false messages on our timelines, and we get them on WhatsApp, it becomes very easy for people to believe in them, also because of the fact that sometimes when you receive it on WhatsApp, you're receiving it from people you really trust. So how difficult is it when, even when you're training journalists or when you're telling people about online verification, how difficult is it to tell them that, I mean, how difficult, what are the kind of challenges you face, and how difficult is it to tell them about fact checking or tell them about online verification?
I would like to begin by, talking a point which I'm sure, all of you would agree with me in the problem of misinformation, which certainly is one not new to India. It sort of predates COVID time, like you said, Kritika, in your beginning. There were two sort of big voids which we all are collectively in our own respective capacities, trying to sort of tackle. One was the information gap, like you mentioned. There's always been huge amount of misinformation. We probably did not have trustworthy information with all of the fact checkers. I think we've been able to make good enough a dent in the space to sort of have good fact checks around. So this problem we in a way have been able to tackle, but there is another angle to it, which is for the common man. It's almost as if they've been shoved onto a information highway, or if I may call it a racetrack, without really having the skills to analyze the information neighborhoods. Remember, most of the internet users in our country really haven't had a chance, get themselves trained on, understanding what the information neighborhood is that they really live in. They don't know, how a news is different from views or opinion or misinformation. And traditionally they've been used to sort of seeing a piece of information that looks like the news and believe it. So that was the second challenge that we had introduced after working with journalists and training journalists on making them aware about how to do fact checking. I think we have a good cohort of newsrooms now doing it. Our second challenge, which we launched this year with the Factshala program, was helping common people on ground understand their information neighborhoods better, so they are able to assess the information that they find online. At least start questioning the source first. Do they realize that it's not coming from a trustworthy source, and then actually helping them navigate to reach that trustworthy source. Every time probably if I've got a message from someone I share a good repo with, doesn't mean it will need to be true. So I think these were the two big challenges that I saw coming from a training background, like training journalists first, and also now people on the ground with the corona infodemic as well. Of course it was the problem going many folds and getting amplified, having learned lessons from what we saw in the elections, then at the time of Pulwama. I know, Kritika, you mentioned, and I'm sure all of you agree, there were certain trends that we saw, at the time of elections in 2018-19, then again at the time of Pulwama and several other incidents. And unfortunately, the same trends, are also being applied now by people who create, this fake news. So I think collectively, for us, it's to ensure both the people trying to, tackle this problem are well equipped to tackle this huge amount, and also the end users have a certain sense of information literacy on knowing how they navigate the online information ecosystem better.
Okay. My next question is to Shalini. Shalini, I want to understand this from you, and that's something Surbhi has also mentioned, that it's always important to sort of question the source of the message, where are you getting it from. But again, I think it's a little similar to what I've asked her also. On WhatsApp, when you receive it from people whom you really trust, you tend to believe what they're saying. That's one factor. Another factor is sometimes confirmation bias. You tend to believe it because you've always believed in it. So if that helps you strengthen your belief or what you've always thought was true, it adds to it. So what do you think? Do you think confirmation bias is a hindrance also because of the fact that there's a research which has been done by Proto, in fact, which talks about WhatsApp, and which says that when you're receiving messages on WhatsApp from people you highly trust, the level of trust in the message is also really high. So what would you say about that?
Yes, I think that that is an issue for sure. That when you receive messages on closed groups, and these are groups of people that you trust, your own family members, friends, your peers, you do tend to trust that message much more than a message that you would receive, from a random source. I agree with Surabhi that media literacy is really important, and media literacy initiatives at this time for different types of people, whether it's for normal users on WhatsApp, whether it's for students, whether it's for the older generation that is more susceptible to misinformation. Media literacy is really important. I also feel that for fact checkers and journalists, access to reliable information, to credible information that can be shared on WhatsApp groups is also equally important. I work as part of Nidan. I currently work with many fact checkers, many of whom also have WhatsApp tip lines. And these tip lines are being used to source misinformation from WhatsApp users. So people send suspicious information, rumors, and also messages where they want somebody to verify that information. And the fact checkers on the other end are using a combination of technology and also fact checking and verification tools to send back credible information to the users. In this situation, I feel that access to credible information is very important because I think, like Vaishali said initially, many of the fact checkers and reporters today have now become health reporters, and most of them are reporting on COVID-19. And even among the fact checking groups that we work with, we've seen a spike in misinformation around COVID-19 between March and June of this year. In that situation, where do fact checkers get this kind of reliable and credible information? As part of the work that we are doing at Nidan, we've also created a database of information and resources around COVID-19 that is accessible to fact checkers and to newsrooms, where we have a team of public health experts who are looking at misinformation on these WhatsApp tip lines and also on other social media platforms. These are, again, commonly asked questions, like some of which that you just talked about, like does drinking hot water or does drinking turmeric milk cure COVID? But also more complex issues related to how does it spread, and responses around how rapidly the pandemic is evolving, and also looking at the changing context and situation. So that kind of expert vetted information being available to fact checkers and journalists is extremely important, so that this can be shared back on the same WhatsApp groups and on other closed and encrypted messaging platforms.
But also the fact that sometimes, like we're talking about misinformation, it's not just coming on WhatsApp groups and social media platforms. It's sometimes really amplified by sometimes it's amplified by media outlets, sometimes it's amplified by social media influencers, and sometimes also amplified by certain politicians, right? So I think I would want to understand this from Karen also. Karen, as a fact checker, how do you make the audience believe, if I were to give you an example, like there are certain recurring fake claims which keep coming back, right? For instance, at the time of abrogation of Article 370, there was this one claim that B.R. Ambedkar was opposed to the idea of Article 370. And that claim kept on coming back. That was something which was amplified by news channels. That was something which even politicians said. So in that case, what is the major challenge that fact checkers face? Then how do you reach the audience? How do you make them believe how do you tell them what the real facts are? And what is the challenge in making them believe in a fact check?
Well, there are several challenges actually, mostly because fact checking is in its infancy stage in India. So it's just been a couple of years old, I would say from late 2016 to where we are right now. And of course, this tiny subsect of journalism, has its challenges of reaching those fact checks to a larger audience, especially when you compare it to how misinformation gets amplified. So whether it's by your mainstream media or by politicians or by any other influencers on social media, that's one challenge at the very basic level. The second challenge is by its nature, a rumor will travel faster than the fact check. And we have seen that irrespective of who the fact checker is, from Weberkoof to Boom to Alt News or to whoever. The fake claim will have shares in lakhs, but your fact check will be a couple of thousands or hundreds or sometimes even double digits. There are challenges. I would say as fact checkers, especially at Boom, we don't think our mission is to convince people. I think our job is to just, as far as some of the other claims go, it is to inform people. So, because I think when you start to think that your job is to convince people, then you may rely on evidence which may suit your conclusion, which I don't think is the right thing to do. So, for the ecosystem that we currently are in, the fact check formats that we follow, they're all explanatory, and the reader is welcome to try out the same things that we have done, and we have that's the most amazing part about the fact checks that are going out in this current environment, is that okay, it tells you, okay, first we went here, then we did this, and if you follow that step-by-step procedure of showing your process and being transparent about it, and the reader can replicate it themselves, where they have that confidence to do it themselves, then they're more likely to believe it, because then it's like, oh, it's not Boom saying it, it's like, okay, I can also go and check, or it's not Weberkoof saying it, I can also go and check this out, because and see for myself. So that is the approach we've largely followed.
I think since we're talking about believing in fact checks, I think I would want to bring in Vaishali at this point. Uh, Vaishali, we have seen, and I think we've done a story also around the fact that sometimes people do not want to believe in fact checks, and there are various reasons for it. So could you just explain that to us in detail?
there's a lot written about it, and neurologists, psychologists have all commented about our belief systems. If you have a very strong belief system, you want to believe it to be it's like a personalized attack when you say that no, you're wrong. So when someone's trying to correct you, it's like how dare they? Because this is my belief system. This is what I believe is right. And the brain's tendency is also to believe what it's being told is right, and it relies on what the familiar information that it has in the background to reconfirm that bias, right? So, if I'm repeatedly told in my little ecosystem that this is correct, hydroxychloroquine will protect you from getting coronavirus, then, and then also told it's harmless, so I'm going to pop the pill. So things like that are a serious concern for fact checkers, because then they need to go and question that person's not question make them question their own belief system. So the job is that much more harder. So that's where the science is at. There's misinformation. If someone's really an informed reader and you present a fact check to them, they're more likely to accept your conclusions and say, okay, I need to change my opinion about it. But if you're a misinformed reader and you are unwilling to make that concession, then that is going to be a problem. That is going to be a problem, and your willingness to change your views is going to be limited. So that's why the job of a fact checker is that much more complicated. So that's where the science is at. The brain believes what it believes, and I'm really sorry, my kid is knocking on the door. So that's where we are at. I think the job that you guys have is extremely tough. You have to present, as Karen said, your job is not to convince them, but to present facts as clearly as possible, and leave it to them to convince themselves.
I think that's absolutely true. In fact, for our viewers, I would want to mention that whatever Vaishali has just spoken about, you can find the related link to the story in the chat box. And I think one very important thing that I want to understand from all of you, I think I'll ask this question to Shalini. I want to understand one thing, that is, even when we are talking about COVID, there are certain incidents around which we saw a spike in misinformation, like in March after the Tablighi Jamaat congregation. In the early days, we saw a lot of misinformation around possible cures and symptoms and what kind of treatment you can do. So I want to understand, why is it that we generally see increase in circulation of misinformation around certain news events?
Well, I think it's true in the case of COVID, and also for if you look at other events, for example, elections last year, whenever there was a significant event, we would see a spike in misinformation around that event. And I think an important reason for that is when the perception is that that particular event is likely to impact many more people than just a small group of people. There is always a spike in misinformation around that. So, in the case of elections, in the case of natural disasters, and now around COVID-19, we've seen that around these events, whether it's the Tablighi Jamaat event, it's also around the time that migrants started traveling from urban areas to their own homes, that we saw a spike in misinformation. We also saw a spike in misinformation around the time the news of the vaccine started coming out. And every time there's a new claims around cures, we see a spike in misinformation. So it's the number of people that are likely to be affected by that event, and the nature of misinformation is related to that, in my understanding. And like I said, this cuts across health and politics, and climate-related information and other events of large public interest.
Yeah, if I may add, to what Shalini said, I think there's clearly been this pattern, like we all began, talking about, that every time there is a newsworthy event where we think people, will be looking for a certain type of information on a news topic. I think that's when those who create or spread misinformation, use that to get more eyeballs and attention. So I think we should be very, of this trend per se. Looks like there is a method behind, the madness for sure. I think it should give us and all our readers the hints that there is, clearly forces who keep track of, what are the newsy events, so people are more likely to fall for whatever they publish wherever. So, that trend mapping certainly gives us sense, and it's been the common across all of these events that we talked about, whether it was elections, whether it was Pulwama, with COVID now. I think with every stage of COVID, as the need for a different type of information sort of, came to the front. Like initially you wanted to know about, the cures or the data, as it's now more about, social distancing. So fake news sort of also, maps the trend of the news or the information that you will need more so.
And do you also feel that polarization in India also make people susceptible to fake news? Like, for instance, during the anti-CAA protest and when the NRC protests were happening and women in Shaheen Bagh were protesting, there was this narrative how protesters were being paid to protest, and it was nobody actually wanted to protest, and people were brainwashing the other into protesting and all of that. So do you think it's sometimes also the polarization which makes people believe in misinformation and these rumors and fake claims?
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of studies, in fact, there was this BBC study earlier as well, which said, fake news a lot, many times, or misinformation, like, all of us at least would like to call it, plays with your emotions. So if you sort of tend to have a bent towards one sort of, ideology or lineage, you will believe a certain, and there'll always be a foreign against misinformation for you to believe and to, sort of say, no, I don't believe in this one. So we are, on various levels of polarized, society in India. And I think those who make use of misinformation to alter our opinions know that pretty well and play around, with it.
If I can just add here, I think that I agree with Surabhi, and I also feel that we've seen that technology is an amplifier when it comes to spreading misinformation, and very often it amplifies social cleavages that already exist. So, for example, in the Indian context, there's already discrimination against certain communities, whether it's the minorities, whether it's migrants, whether it's according to gender, etc. Those biases already exist in society, and when we see the nature of misinformation, very often the same biases are reflected in that as well. So people who are spreading misinformation are playing on the social realities that exist. That's true. We've seen in the case of misinformation around the Tablighi Jamaat incident, misinformation around the migrant crisis. Of course, initially we saw a lot of xenophobia when, news related to China and how the virus was spread by China had started coming, so that kind of xenophobia. So all these biases already exist in society, and then we see them in fake news and in this kind of misleading information on social media and online platforms as well.
Okay, at this point of time, I think I'd like to take up a question from one of our viewers. They want to know, how do you identify what's fake and what can they do, because it's difficult for them to spot and, know if it's fake or it's real. I think, Karen, it would be nice if you could answer that for us.
Yeah, sure. I mean, great question. It's even as journalists, we're finding it tough. Like you rightly said, it's an infodemic. There's just so much, and so much of it is fake. So I would say, for the younger lot, more savvy, more tech savvy, more in tune with the news, be the fact checker among your own family groups. Take that responsibility. Shield your parents, relatives, and do it gently, so that they don't turn off when you try to show them what the facts really are. But certain things, if another fact checker I spoke to, and he had a very helpful infographic as to how to navigate this. So certain things that you can't really vouch for, and if you receive it in a WhatsApp message, for example, there was a message about, there was this long article about a researcher in the first person account of the person who worked in the lab in Wuhan. Now, logically, I mean, it's very frightening, but when you read the whole thing, because it sounds completely true. I mean, this person, is weaving this elaborate tale with a lot of details, which makes it very, very true to believe. But, as a reader, as a non-journalist, if I just say, okay, logically, if, can I figure out who this person is? And I don't mean forensically track down who this person is, but is there a way to verify even one part of this message? And there wasn't. With that particular message, there really wasn't for the average person. So I mean, if the thumb rule would be, if something is too, I used to say earlier, if something is too good to be true, it probably isn't. If something is too, now I say, if something is too bad to be true, it probably isn't as well. So if a message is upsetting, take a moment to assess and see how that particular message is making you feel. If it's angering you, if you're feeling disgust, I would encourage you to trust your gut and make the effort to find out a little more about it before rapidly spreading it to every group that you're on.
Survi, is there something that you'd like to add to what Karen said?
Sure, if I may, add here, a lot of us should understand that this information overload that we are now facing at the COVID time and even before that. First thing is, I think we must accept that it is here to stay. Like I said, we are on this information highway or race track, and we should really learn how to navigate and drive on this, which means we need to train ourselves to identify trustworthy sources of information. One biggest help that I think that can come handy as a tip to anyone wanting to know whether a piece of information that they're accessing is true or not, they should question the source of the information that they're receiving it from. Has it come from the original source? If say a forward says it has come from WHO, have you got it from an official WHO channel? Do not go by the credibility of who's sending it to you. So, I would agree when Karen said, be your own, sort of verifier, do a bit of, check, take responsibility and onus. Say, for example, if you live near a beach or, a sea, you won't just, build barricades there. You really, the better thing to save yourself from any amount of inundation would be to learn swimming. So train your mind to know, and value good information and really differentiate between, good and bad information and start questioning the source of information. Know and nurture news literacy, habits. I think, you should understand what are the good sources of information at a time like this. You should go to sources like WHO, ICMR, news channels. Fact checkers have been doing, sometimes takes a long day to do an entire fact check. So, try and visit fact checkers. There are plenty of them who spend long days doing that for you. So develop good news literacy habits, I would say that way.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, my advice,
completely.
sorry, my advice
Sorry.
was for the general reader, but for the journalist out there watching this, there are a couple of very simple things that you can learn right now after this session ends as well, which is one is for images, learn how to do a reverse image search. It's the simplest thing. It will blow your mind if you've never heard about it, if you've never done it before. It's as simple as, I have a photo, I'm going to go to images.google.com and upload it and see where all that image has appeared before on the internet. It's something as simple as that. The other advice would be there are, follow fact checkers, go through their stories. Because the feedback that we've gotten is that even legacy journalists from newspapers who started following an alt news or a Boom Live or a Webberkoof picked up things that they then applied to their own stories, and whether it was going and finding out the who is details of a website, which is the registration details or something like that. So fact checks and the kind of fact checks that are coming out, the process is very transparent. I would urge all readers out there, and especially journalists, to please replicate that. And if you have a problem, where all of us are on Twitter, we're reading everything, just find me or find somebody else from Boom and say, you wrote this, I tried it, it didn't work. I am pretty sure somebody will reply. So yeah, I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, that's completely fine. In fact, thank you so much. I think you've just answered one of the questions that one of the viewers had asked. Ayaskan Das, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correct. He had the same question. He wanted to know if there are any tools that they can learn about, any sort of online platforms where they can go and cross-check what people are saying. So I hope we've answered I hope Karen has answered your question, Ayaskan. And I think, yeah, I completely agree with the fact that it's for certain things, it's easy for us to fact check, and it's important for us to fact check before we forward it. And that's something that I think all of us fact checkers, even we at Webkoof, tell people that, it's always very important for anybody to find out the source of the information. But that's one thing, I think, which is a challenge when we talk about WhatsApp, because of end-to-end encryption and because it's a private messaging app. So, Shalini, if you could help me understand, or if you could explain it to us, that how do we combat misinformation on WhatsApp, or what could be done to tackle misinformation on WhatsApp?
These days, whenever somebody asks me, a friend or a family member or someone that I know, about misinformation on WhatsApp, I always connect them to fact checkers who have WhatsApp tip lines. And currently in India, there are many fact checkers who have WhatsApp tip lines who are responding to queries on these tip lines. So I think the best way is to save the number of a fact checking group running a WhatsApp tip line on your phone. And whenever you receive a query that you're not able to check yourself, like, Karen just explained, if you cannot do a Google image, reverse image search on your own, or would like someone else to do it, or if you want to know more about that piece of information, the best is to send it to a fact-checking group that's running a WhatsApp tip line and providing credible, verified reports in response to that. That's one way. And I think that groups that are running these WhatsApp tip lines are using various ways to respond to users on WhatsApp. So many of them are sending back links from their own websites. So, if as a fact-checking group, I receive a query on a WhatsApp tip line that my group has already responded to, then one way to respond to the user sending the query is to send a link from the website. The other way is to send a more visual response. So, on WhatsApp, people who are using Midan's platform Check can also use a meme generator to send a more visual response, which is more shareable on WhatsApp. And that's a second way. And then, of course, a more descriptive analytic response to the query sent by the WhatsApp user. So I would encourage people to go to these tip lines for any queries, rumors, suspicious messages that you receive on WhatsApp.
I think from here, I would want to just take a step back and also talk about something which, again, I've been seeing a lot of people asking too. During Delhi riots, we saw a lot of graphic and gory images, videos being circulated. And as journalists, as fact checkers, we had to really sit down and go through those images and videos because, to analyze it, to understand if there was anything that could act as a clue. So I think I want to understand this from Vishali. Vishali, if you could tell us about the therapy needs for fact checkers and why is it important? Because, it does really impact journalists and fact checkers who are doing this day in and day out, looking at imagery, looking at videos. So what would you say about that?
The job is so difficult. I think someone from Boom, Jency, or was it you, Karen? I don't know if it's written about going through hours and hours and hours of gory images, and it has to have an impact on you. It has to, you can't leave those images back and go off to sleep. It plays in your mind constantly, and it's literally your job to go through it in details. You can't turn your head away and say, no, I'm not going to look at it right now. So I think as we'd reached out to various fact-checking organizations at that time, and we'd asked, how can we help? What help, what resources, and what help do you have? That do your companies have that they provided to you? And it's very important that fact-checking companies and news organizations have psychologists and counselors on board, where young fact-checkers, young journalists can turn to and ask for advice and constantly have a conversation going. And if a fact checker says, I really can't do this anymore, this is impacting my mental health, give them a break. Give them a break, understand that the issue is not that they're running away from work, it's really taking a toll on their mental health. But it's really important for organizations to not get away from their responsibility, get counselors on board, get psychologists on board, leave channels of communication open, and constantly keep talking to your team, because the work is difficult. The work, it's not just, they're obviously the journalists on the ground, but they're also fact checkers sitting in their room exposed to extremely gory images all the time. So keep your communications open, talk, open up, step away if you can't take it anymore. Kritika, I think your mic is off.
So sorry.
Yeah.
Karen, if I could ask you,
Sure.
since of course Boom is also a fact-checking website, what Vishali said that organizations also need to understand. So what are your inputs on that? Not just as a journalist or a fact-checker, but even as an organization, do you think, sometimes it becomes important to stop and let your colleagues or your journalists or your fact-checkers not do it if they think that it's impacting their mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a topic close to my heart because, I've been talking about vicarious trauma for the last 2 years. And we kick-started this conversation because we realized that exposure to this kind of violent imagery, whether that's physical violence, sexual violence, or even something that, outrages your sort of moral code when you see like a little child pulling a blanket of his dead mother. I mean, something inside you it's upset and it's disturbing, and we realize that there is a big mental toll to pay to be in this profession because we're exposed to it throughout the day. There's no escape. Actually, other professions have the luxury of turning off at a certain point in time. For people, for journalists especially, who are expected to be on throughout the day, it's too much. And it started to manifest. People were falling. They were showing symptoms of vicarious trauma. And I would, the first step is to really is to say that I'm not a weak journalist, or I'm not a weak fact checker if I'm feeling traumatized after watching something. And I don't, and it doesn't matter how important you think it is necessary to watch that. So, like for the Delhi riots, for instance, there is absolutely no shame in feeling. In admitting that this stuff is impacting you. The ones who say that it doesn't are lying. I can say this, authoritatively. I've been doing this for 3 years or 3+ years. So one is the acknowledgement. As far as organizations go, I'm, as an editor, we kickstarted this debate. I had this conversation. And I said we need to have protocols in place to protect our reporters, to protect our fact checkers from the mental damage and the toll that this kind of work is taking. We follow certain steps which I think any organization can do. Some of it is really simple, like don't look at this stuff before bedtime. Because if you look at it, just before sleeping, you think you'll cheat and look at your phone, and then you see it, and there's this graphic imagery playing, and it stays with you. It affects your sleep, and it disturbs you. So certain things, very simple things, but they're so important. And like Vaishali rightly said, I absolutely 200% agree that fact-checking organizations and even journalists, in fact, now need psychological support to talk about this stuff, and a professional to give them steps to navigate this, because it's too much. Like even just going through all of last year, the amount of news events and the kind of volume of fake news that it generated, the kind of imagery and all of that, it has an impact at the end of the day, and it manifests in different ways. So we've sort of institutionalized that at Boom. We have processes in place. First of all, there's no stigma at all. In fact, as an editor, I had this conversation with everyone and said, what are your triggers? And would like an abuse video trigger you? Would a lynching video trigger you? Would and people are vulnerable and honest, and we don't penalize them for that. We cannot penalize them for that. And it's as editors, as managers, it's our job to protect our guys. So I'm very happy that this pandemic has made other people realize as well that work has such a big impact on mental health, and you're supposed to look after that as well. I'm sorry, I've completely hijacked your question, but
No, I think it completely makes sense, and I can completely relate to what you're saying, because yeah, it does somewhere impact all of us, and it does take a toll. So I think that's something I completely understand. I think I'll also
add here, Kritika.
yes.
Sorry, just a minute. I want to say that I agree 100% with what Karen is saying. And I also want to say that there are resources that have been developed by, say, the DART Center, the International Center for Journalists, and even the Reuters Institute for journalists and even for fact checkers who are covering the pandemic and doing stories around that. And some of these are excellent resources that we can look at. They are easily accessible and might be very relevant for journalists and fact checkers here as well. And I agree that a supportive newsroom and reassuring team members, checking in on team members is extremely important at this time, because many surveys and many studies have shown the impact of the pandemic on journalists and fact checkers who are constantly exposed to this kind of content.
That completely makes sense. And I think I just want to take one more question from one of our viewers. I think, Surbhi, if you could take that question. Prajwal Kasera, he wants to understand what is the purpose behind fake news? Why do people peddle misinformation? What do they get out of it?
I'm sure this is one question, as the COVID, pandemic, saw the inflow and the flooding of information. We all are trying to sort of figure out. But of course, we see with different kind of, misinformation. There are, with political, we know there are probably, other reasons. Sometimes it is, business motivated. A lot of people run content farms and websites, which probably, get paid, or people get paid for doling out content in numbers. It takes longer to write a verified fact check story, but probably is far more easier to, churn like 40 stories a day, which, only look sugar coated, are easy to appeal to, like all the topics that we discussed, emotional, polarized society. So it's, business for some, propaganda, for others. It's political polarization, and sometimes it is profit making as well. And I'm sure, we all have seen these, these being the primary motives behind a lot of misinformation that we've seen in different news events all through the last 2-3 years. Profit, propaganda. A lot many times it is poor fact checking or verification skills. Breaking news. I know mainstream media falling for fake news is a big problem for us in India as well. A lot many times it's the breaking news cycle that leads to misinformation coming from some media houses, but largely I think sometimes propaganda, profit, damaging the image of
Virality
others.
as well.
Yeah, sorry.
Virality as well. A lot of people just want to go viral. So
Yeah.
I think this is another question that one of our viewers is asking, Mohammed Abdul. He just wants to understand that there's always a gap between fake news and fact check. So, if somebody is believed in the fake news, they might not want to believe in the fact check. But I think that's something which remotely Karen has already answered when she said that it's not always it's about presenting facts to the people, and then it's about the fact that they want to believe it or they don't want to believe in it. But it's about the fact that you have to put facts in front of your audience, and then they can always go back to the source. And then, once you have facts in front of you, it depends on you whether you want to believe it or you don't want to believe it. So I think, Karen, if you would want to add something to that.
Right now we're like all the fact checkers out there are preaching to the converted. We're preaching to people who already are wanting fact checks, who probably are not seeing the fake news in the first place. And I think it's a challenge. We'll figure out how to reach this sort of audience, but we need the support of ordinary people as well. We need the support of the citizens out there. And so many times people have stepped up and they tag us on Twitter, or they send us. They are stepping up and responding to that call to say, okay, and so many times people just say, hey, can you please do a fact check? I'm fighting with somebody on the other group. I need to reply to them. So, kudos to the ones who are being fact checkers on their groups. More power to you. May your tribe increase. And more power to all the fact checkers out there. So.
Okay, I think I just want to get all of you. I'll just come to each one of you, and I want to understand one last thing. What do you think needs to be done to make fact checking more robust in India? Shalini, if I could come to you first.
I think one way, of course, is to have many more people having access to media literacy initiatives and always checking the source of information. But in addition to that, I feel that it's also important to respond to people in areas outside the metros, people living in small towns, in rural areas. There's a lot of misinformation there. Many people don't have access to verified information, to credible information or independent media. So reaching out to people in those areas in their own languages, responding to hyperlocal misinformation is also extremely important. A lot of the focus is currently on urban areas, English speaking people, but increasingly there are many more fact checking groups that are working with various Indian languages, and that's a very encouraging and promising trend, which needs to be happening at a larger scale.
Surbhi?
Yep. If I may add, so I think, to make fact checking and also, to tackle the problem of misinformation in a more robust way, I would agree with Shalini. Certainly media literacy is something that we cannot ignore. One, we need to take the common masses along and sort of train them on valuing good journalism much more than a random piece of information, making them aware about their information neighborhoods, so they can differentiate between good piece of information and just random raw information, and helping them spot misinformation. Apart from that, I also think talking more about it, and the problem of misinformation is just so key. I think the biggest then that the fact checking community altogether has been able to make is they've been able to sort of mainstream the talk about fact checking. A lot more people at least understand that there is a problem. We will come to the next stage and the challenge that it shouldn't be like a blanket no to everything that they come across. But I think the very first thing that all of the transparent explanatory fact checking work that Karen mentioned, and the sort of debates that you are doing, this webinar for example, I think it's extremely important for us to keep the discourse on. So talk a lot more about the need to really do more fact checking or have more media literacy in place. Manifest really why bad information can be harmful. We did discuss, some of the ill effects, but I think it's very important to tell the public at large why it is really important for all of them to know what is right. I mean, information is staple. They all need information to, form their opinions, to take good decisions. And also, I think in terms of fact checking, automation is something I would say we're, Karen mentioned, we're sort of in the infancy of fact checking. A lot more work on sort of automation. Fact checkers do spend long days doing a lot of manual work, which I think through automated processes some of it can be taken away, so they can focus on deeper investigative fact checking. There are certain methods or things that they do repeatedly which automation processes can take over and make their lives easier, so they can do more qualitative analysis, or probably, do it in easier and different formats. And of course, languages. I think I'm very glad to see that a lot more over the last 2 years. Yes, there are a lot more, fact checkers doing fact checking in very many different languages. I think when we started, with our first program, there were about 3 or 4 fact checkers doing fact checking in primarily English, then soon Hindi. But now I know that at least in 10 languages, there are about, 20 to 30 fact checking teams in different outlets, some of them independent and others. But there is still a lot more scope. We are a diverse country. We can't just keep fact checking limited to, I think, primarily, a lot of it in English, Hindi. Yes, it covers a lot of ground, but, far more languages doing more intensive fact checking. So, yeah, I think those things if we keep in mind.
Surbhi, I do have a follow-up question for you. I just want to understand, you talked about automation, right? How much do you think is automation actually going to help in fact checking?
I would say it can. I mean, I've always said that I don't think we're reaching that stage at all where we would have a machine where you would just, put in a picture or a link and it'll give you a yes or no. But it can only help amplify the work that fact checkers do. It takes away a lot of, manual, work that fact checkers do, makes their life easier, so they can do more fact checks, more qualitative fact checks, so there is better offering to the public at large. So I think if at all, it is a complex road, a complex journey that we all need to sort of work together on. I don't think technology alone or just fact checkers alone. We've seen in the past 2 years, with I mean, there is, of course, there are other things that technology platforms can do, or training platforms can do, or fact checkers can do. But with them coming together, we've sort of traveled some distance for sure. So I think it's important to work together with technology so we can, amplify the work that fact checkers do, and in at the end achieve the aim that we all have. That's tackling the big, problem.
Karen, if just your comments on what are the kind of challenges fact checkers are facing and what can be done to make fact checking more robust in India.
Well, the challenges are plenty. But if we have to tackle the fake news problem in India, and I think Shalini and Subi have repeated a lot of excellent points, then we have to be ambitious and we have to think large. So a lot of questions I see in today's chat are about what about when the mainstream media peddles fake news. And I think this problem is going to persist until the ownership structures of newsrooms don't change. So right now you have a very corporatized media which is not serving the interest of the people who they're writing about. So that is one. The other are your other institutions. For example, your judiciary. There has to be faith that the judiciary will protect the weakest, in this country. Then we come to media literacy, not just for people to be able to tell what's a reliable news source or not, but even for our very own journalists, we find basic skills when it comes to navigating online information lacking, which is why we're calling out so many media organizations on a daily basis. I mean, you just have to go through it, and it's mind boggling. And that does such a disservice because, I mean, what does it tell the average person? Oh, everything is fake. It sort of reiterates that a really awful stereotype that you can't trust your media, which is problematic. So, train your journalists, train them better. Be open about your corrections, be open about your attributions. That's on the other side. What are the tech platforms doing? Yes, Facebook is fact checking. Boom is a third party fact checker with Facebook. So is the Quint. But do more. Like when I see what Twitter is doing in the US and what Twitter is doing in India, it's nothing. I mean, they're pulling up their politicians, they're pulling up the president for fake tweets. Here, every random political functionary is getting away with saying whatever they feel like, because maybe they feel bullied in India. I don't know, but the thing is that if you are doing 100x whatever you're doing right now, amplify that, keep doing it, keep working together. The other thing is we need more research into misinformation. We need structured researches. So where are our colleges, our IITs coming forward and saying, okay, we're gonna research this problem and we're gonna present our findings. I would urge, if anybody from the academia circle is watching, then please take this up on an urgent. And I'm sorry, there are many who are doing it. But it needs to be publicized. It needs, the average person needs to be aware about it as well. And lastly, not all of it is gloom and doom. We may feel like we're fighting a very insurmountable battle. But I remember when we started this journey, I started in somewhere around early 2017. And at that point of time, I said I work as a fact checker, and people said, oh, what is that? They had no idea what this is. And cut to 2020 or maybe just before that, these tiny websites through their work made such a dent that they made the mainstream media, they made the largest the Jagrans of the world, the TOIs, the India Todays set up their own fact-checking desks. So those are victories. Those are victories that have come from tiny organizations as well as all the readers who have supported us. So yes, I mean, everybody has to do their part, and eventually this will be at a stage where we won't be notorious for being the country with the most fake news. I truly believe that. I believe that if everybody works together, we'll get there.
No, that's completely true. And I think I completely agree with what you're saying. Vaishali, if I could get you in, your comments on what do you think needs to be done to make fact checking more acceptable in India?
I think you need to make it accessible, and you need to present it in multiple languages. I think, as Shalini said, it's still limited. I mean, there are organizations that are doing it, but your fact checks are still limited to urban centers. You need to make sure that the information reaches to the last person, and that's where the information starts going completely viral. So it's our responsibility to get it in as many languages as possible and make it accessible. You guys run media literacy workshops, fact-checking workshops, take it to smaller towns, to smaller schools and universities, get children, introduce fact-checking programs in schools and universities, get children to start questioning this at that age itself, questioning information that's coming to them from that age itself. And then over a period of time, as Karen said, we will see a change. With health, it's a little more complicated. When you send a fact check that's a fake news that says university from XYZ did a research by this PhD scholar, that tendency to believe it is that much more. So health is complicated. You need to go back and check, is this a real university? Is this a real scientist? Where is this research published? Is it peer reviewed? Is it to be taken at face value? Who were the people behind that research? So there are multiple questions you have to constantly ask, because even in terms of knowledge that's being presented for vaccines, they all are coming with a certain interest behind them. Vaccines being released by press releases as opposed to being as peer-reviewed studies. So all of that questioning you have to do constant, and you have to make them aware, because it's presented like it's news doesn't necessarily mean it is.
It's completely true. It's definitely very important to make fact-checking acceptable. Also in terms of languages in which fact-check is being done, because it shouldn't only be in Hindi and English, because we see a lot of misinformation which is being circulated on various platforms. It's in local languages, it's in regional languages. So I think with that, I'm going to close this discussion. Thank you so much, Karen, Vaishali, Surbhi, and Shalini for joining us today. And I would also want to really appeal to all our viewers. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion today. And in case you have any doubts, you come across any sort of messages, any images that you want us to verify, you can always send it to any of the fact checkers. You can send it to us at WebCoof, and we will definitely verify it for you. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for the discussion today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.